Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening to the podcast from. Welcome back to another installment of the Podium Podcast for the 2025 British Grand Prix preview around one of my favourite circuits, Silverstone. And you might be saying home bias, but still, Silverstone has proved time and time again that it deserves to be on the calendar because of the absolute incredible racing it provides. I mean, if you look at the last, I'll say 5 to 6 races have been pretty much one of the best races of each season. Yeah, 2024, Lewis Hamilton win after 3 years without a win. Yeah, 2023, Lando trying to overtake Max into turn one. The whole crowd goes wild. So we've had plenty of bangers, and hopefully this year will not change. It will be a banger as it really shapes up to be, because we do have a lot to talk about. We know that the weather, the rain, which is supposed to be a factor for this weekend, is going to play into some people's hands, whilst it will be a disadvantage for some people. But regardless, we'll be looking at the biggest talking points heading into the home of Formula One might say. And I think the first talking point we have to talk about is Mercedes, because Mercedes coming into this weekend, they won here last year. They seem really good in cooler temperatures. We look at Canada, we look at Vegas on the Canada as I suppose Mercedes hunting grounds, and that's pretty much down to the weather. Now, if you look at Silverstone coming up to this weekend, it is not extremely hot compared to last weekend in Austria, which means that they will be back into the mix for this weekend. They've also brought an upgrade in terms of the front wing, which they have adjusted for the downforce, which is what you need around the high-speed corners of Silverstone. So they should be looking to be favourites coming into this weekend, and I'll be very, very, I suppose, excited to see what they do and if they can really be favourites like they were in Canada. We also got Verstappen to talk about. We're going to make it short and sweet, because personally, I do believe if he does not do well this weekend, his title hopes have pretty much disappeared just like that. This is round 12 or 24. It is halfway through the season, and I suppose on a mental stance, if he's over 50 points behind, which he is now, with half the season to go, it seems to be a very big setback for the Dutchman. This is a circuit that he hasn't really been victorious in quite a lot. You look at the recent race winners, and he only won in 23 and his 70th anniversary Grand Prix in 2020, which in terms of other circuits is not really one of his most, I suppose, most successful circuits, which means that McLaren of course will be in the mix as always, and it means that it'll be a little bit more harder for Verstappen. Good news, I guess, is that his, I suppose, penalty situation is now cleared, because it is in July, not in June, which means that he's back. I think he's dropped down to 6 penalty points, which means that he will not have to be treading on eggshells anymore. So as McLaren as well have to be in the talk. 15 points separate the two going into Lando's home Grand Prix. You would think, having the home advantage, he would be the favourite going into it. And I would reckon that he will be the favourite-ish going into it. He loves this track. He's had a podium here in 23, had a podium here in 24. In 2021, he came 4th. So he does like the circuit a lot. It does mean that he will have that extra pressure going into his home Grand Prix. It's given that is his home Grand Prix, he will have, I suppose, a little bit more on his shoulders in that sort of sense. But as a title challenger, you just have to, I suppose, rise to it. Piastri had the same in Australia, and also with Australia, it was the first race of the season, which gives a little bit more stress. But here, Lando is within 15 points of the top spot in the championship, which is, of course, his teammate. Coming off a race win as well, he should be, I suppose, a little bit more confident in his approach to the weekend, and he should win. If he doesn't win, then I do think mentally it will set him back a little bit. But this is definitely a make or break weekend for Lando and his championship hopes. If we look at the circuit itself, it is geared towards overtaking, like in Austria. You have the high speed corners of Abbey, Copse, Stowe, whilst also having the little bit of low speed corners in, I suppose, Club, Vale, Luffield, Aintree, which makes the circuit setup wise a little bit more difficult compared to others. You can't just rely on either straight speed or downforce. You have to have a mix of the two, which Mercedes have pretty much done well around in other circuits, which I suppose are similar to Silverstone. Overtaking, you can overtake in a lot of places because of the mix of high speed and low speed corners and straights. You've also got down into, I think it is Luffield. There's an overtaking spot. Turn 3 as well as an overtaking spot if you're brave enough. Copse, and of course Stowe is pretty much where a lot of people make their overtakes. You would think that because it's an old circuit, overtaking will be a little bit more difficult, but in the past it has seemed that overtaking is not that difficult because of also the two-stop strategy, which most teams, I suppose, are more eager to execute because of the high degradation around here. Pirelli have opted for the C1, C2, C3, the hardest of their range, because of the amount of, I suppose, strain put on the tyres around Silverstone. We saw in 2020 how if they went one step softer, punctures would be a threat, which we saw in the last couple of laps. Hamilton's infamous last lap with 3 tyres. So two-stop will be probably the strategy, which means even more action for us, even more tyre offsets, even more, I suppose, different strategies being put into the mix, people taking gambles, which we like to see. And as we move on to the weather quite swiftly, there is a threat of rain for definitely Saturday and possibly Sunday in typical British summer weather fashion, I guess. Friday on practice is supposed to be cloudy, but still a low chance of rain and 25 degrees, which is fairly warm at this time of year. Saying that, we have had some quite nice weather over the last couple of weeks. Saturday, though, it will be a different story. 23 degrees with a 64% chance of rain, which means that qualifying will be similar to last year in that it will be, well, we don't know if it's going to be a wet-dry session, but it will definitely be wet, which means that everyone is put on a rather equal playing field. And for the race, 20 degrees, the coolest will be this weekend, and a 25% chance of rain, which means that rain will be somewhere around the Northamptonshire countryside, but still it will be an element which the strategists have to consider for this weekend. Predictions time and qualifying for 5th and 4th, I've got for Leclerc and Piastri. The top 3, you might ask. I'm going to put Verstappen in P3, Lando in P2, and Russell. George Russell will take pole position around Silverstone. Will it be a similar story in the Grand Prix? Well, that is a good question. P5 and P4 I've gone for both Ferraris, Hamilton and Leclerc to take 4th and 5th, whilst 3rd, 2nd and 1st will be between the 2 McLarens and a Mercedes. Which way around? I do think Piastri will move up to 3rd position in the race, whilst Lando Norris will take the victory around Silverstone, as George Russell will finish 2nd. In the middle of the race, which is just based on 5s, I've gone for Piastri, Norris, Russell, Hamilton and Leclerc. Biggest good surprise, I'm going to have to back Mercedes just down to the weather. I do think that their car, as we've seen in Canada, is absolutely dominant in cooler conditions. This is a cooler conditions. They got pole last year. They won last year. So I would put my money on Mercedes to do fairly well. Biggest flop, and I've done Alpine. It seems over the last couple of years they haven't done the best around Silverstone, and I'm backing them to also not do well in Britain. Crazy prediction now, and I'm going to go for 2 or more red flags in qualifying. Looking back on it, I do not think we've had a wet qualifying session this year. And I'm going to say that is correct, and that is correct because we just haven't. And I do think that there'll be 2 or more red flags in qualifying down to the rain. I think that'll wrap up a short but sweet British Grand Prix preview. Make sure to like and subscribe and have a simply lovely day. Goodbye.